All right, and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, it's my pleasure to talk to you about the Sustainable Rivers Program. It's perhaps something many of you have not heard about before, and hopefully you'll be hearing more about it in the future. I'm going to go over what has been happening and how we're in an expansion phase right now. I'm Gretchen Benjamin. I work for the Nature Conservancy, and historically have primarily worked up and down the Mississippi River, but with the Sustainable Rivers Program, I work on rivers across the country. The program was initially set up as a partnership between the Corps of Engineers and the Nature Conservancy, but there are numerous stakeholders in working on this program. So I'll just move on from there. So as the program started, there were a number of rivers around the country where the Corps and the Nature Conservancy and other stakeholders were working on trying to get environmental flows included in dam management. But the Green River in Kentucky is probably one of the prime reasons why this Sustainable Rivers Program came into being. And on the Green River, we were looking at issues associated with Mammoth Cave and the ecology there, and also endangered and native mussel species being impacted by dam operations. And so the Nature Conservancy began talking with the Louisville district of the Corps of Engineers about ways that they could manage the dam to create better ecological outcomes for both the cave and those species. And as they began this conversation, they looked at how could they add environmental flows along with the way that they currently manage the dam. So how could they just use the flexibility at the dam to include these environmental flows? And they brought in experts and started looking at the literature and what they really needed for ecological and hydrologic flows in order to have better conditions for both the cave and these species. And then how could they work that into the way that the dam was operated. And it took a number of years to get to the point where they had what we call a flow prescription developed, and they could start to test that flow prescription. So it really wasn't until 2006 that we started to implement this innovative flow release from the Green River Dam to have these improved conditions for both the cave and the species. But the interesting thing in this process was that as they started to look at dam operations, not only did they figure out how to create better conditions for the cave and the species of interest, but they also were able to extend the summer recreational use, and they actually enhanced flood protection, which was one of the primary reasons why the dam was in place. So we found through this process that this was something we wanted to duplicate around the country, that other rivers could benefit from this. And so even before they started with the actual release in 2002, there was an initiative, a Sustainable Rivers initiative that was started between the Corps and the Nature Conservancy. And as we started this, obviously we were working on improving the health and the life of the river within by changing dam operations to restore the ecosystem. But we always had to consider how we would maintain the current project benefits. And so we had to figure out what that balance was. And as we were doing this, we looked at environmental flows from what was really defined at the Brisbane Declaration, where we're talking about quantity, timing, and quality of flows that would sustain freshwater and estuary ecosystems. But there again, how do we do that? And then also consider or include those into the ways that we were operating the dams. And then from an operational standpoint, looking at flows, we were trying to determine if we had flexibility at the dam so we could add management decisions that would allow for the manipulation of the water and that land-water interface to create those ecological benefits for the system. And as the program developed from 2002 till about 2010, there were 8 different sites that we worked on across the country. And you can see that they're a little bit more heavily located towards the eastern part of the United States. And some of that has to do with the fact that the Bureau of Reclamation is managing and operating a lot of the dams in the western portion of the state. We aren't really working with BOR the way we are working with the Corps of Engineers on this program. But these first set of projects, there were some incredible outcomes that came from them. And we also, you know, we've seen some that didn't work as well. The black, white, and little red, we haven't gotten very far with that. But the other examples are ones where we have made some substantial change. And the way that we went about doing this was, there's basically 3 stages that we go through. And the first stage is called advance, where we are trying to get the right stakeholders together. So that's, you know, the experts in terms of the ecosystem and hydrology, but also who are stakeholders from a municipality standpoint, water supply, hydropower, basically a very diverse group of stakeholders together to get them to understand what it is we're trying to do, and how we can work with the dam's flexibility to include ecological outcomes as well. And we do an extensive literature review and put together a summary report that really documents what those ecological and hydrologic needs are to create better outcomes by using the dam. And then we start to work through a process where we're modeling the information and looking at within those dam operations, what can we include? And we look at it, the flows from different hydrologic conditions that we may experience, be it low flow, medium flow, high flows, floods, that sort of thing, and come up with a prescription. And the actual prescription itself really comes out of a workshop when we have the right stakeholders together and we have all that background information together. We gather everybody together to go through a modeling exercise with the regime prescription tool, RPT. Some of you may know of that. And really sit down with folks and talk about where, if we need some spring spawning triggers in there, we can put those in there, and what are the hydrologic conditions that allow us to do that. Maybe we need lower waters during the summer for improved condition for, it might be a cypress forest or some other type of floodplain forest, aquatic vegetation, that sort of thing. But we come up with different prescriptions for different times of the year and figure out, depending on the hydrology of a particular year, what may or may not work. And walking out of that workshop, we typically have consensus on how we can move forward. Once we have that prescription in hand, then we start to test that prescription. And obviously we're going to have different hydrology pretty much every year, and different abilities to implement those prescriptions. But we tend to do it a number of times, trying to tweak it adaptively management to the point where we feel pretty comfortable about the type of prescription we ultimately want to have for a particular reservoir and dam system. And once we get to that point, we get to the final phase in the process, which is where we are actually looking to legally document these environmental flow prescriptions into the operation of the dams. And this is done to make sure that in the future, as we have new water control managers coming in, that they're still going to follow this prescription at a dam. So it can be a process that takes 2 or 3 years. We did it fairly quickly on the Des Moines River recently, and other places it might take 7 to 10 years to get through this process. So by 2019, we had increased the area that we had been working from that original 8 up to 16. We were working on 16 different reservoirs across the system. We were primarily working on general dams, and those are dams that have multiple uses. It might be flood control and water supply and things of that nature. But we were starting to look at other dam types across the country, like dry dams, Section 7 dams, and locks and dams. And just to start to expand our portfolio. And for the first time in 2017, the Sustainable Rivers Project turned into the Sustainable Rivers Program because Congress recognized it as a program, and that helped to increase our funding. So that year we went to about a $400,000 a year program rather than it was about 300,000 prior to that. But we're really just over the years trying to increase the portfolio of the different reservoirs we were working on, and really trying to look at different operational and conditions so that we could expand what we were doing. There's, and the Environmental Advisory Board really is supportive of the Sustainable Rivers Program, and they suggested that we try and get to 20 rivers by 2020. And so that was sort of in our focus as we moved forward. And this is what our map looks like with the getting to 2019. You can see we're at about slightly over 5,000 river miles that we're working on across the country in various levels of various stages with the advance and the implement and the incorporate. But the Corps is managing over almost 53,000 miles across the country. All of that you see here in blue is what the Corps manages. And so our hope is that someday we can actually be having Sustainable Rivers Program working at all of these 53,000 miles across the country. And this past year, I guess I call it our Christmas present. We got a Christmas present through the appropriations process that took the Sustainable Rivers Program from a $400,000 a year program to a $5 million a year program. So you can imagine that we have been scrambling since then. It's a good news story, and all the bad news we have right now, this is really a good news story. And so we're really trying to expand our geographic focus beyond, well, within the general reservoirs, but also include more of the locks and dams, the Section 7 dams, and the dry dams, increase our monitoring and communication, and actually try and do some resilience mapping so we know where our priority rivers would be with this program. And so we did, let's see here, why is that doing that? I'm not sure why that showed up there, but we have been able to, we went through a second round of proposals, and that increased the number of rivers that potentially we will be working on this year by an additional, actually I should go back, I'm sorry. I should go back here. This is what our proposed rivers will look like from this second set of proposals that are coming through. It's kind of the pinky purple you see on there. And that's an additional 6,200 river miles and 14 rivers, 28 reservoirs that we may be working on in association with the program because of this increased funding. And you can see we're working on a few more of the arid rivers, the Pecos and potentially the Rio Chama, and also some northern rivers. And for Illinois, both the Kaskaskia and Farmdale Creek, there's a dry dam on Farmdale Creek that we'll be looking at to create better conditions there. So we'll have more stuff landing in the state of Illinois. But what we'll see, on the ground is, in fact, more monitoring on the Willamette, the Des Moines, Roanoke, Atchafalaya, and the Mississippi. We expect to see more demonstrations in about 5 different areas. We will surpass what the Environmental Advisory Board had suggested. We get to 20 rivers by 2020. We'll be well into 30 rivers or beyond that. And what we're really focusing on right now is to have a strong base, because this $5 million program that we have this year, we'd like that to be the permanent base. And so we have to make sure that we effectively and efficiently spend these funds this year, and be able to keep that coming in future years. So that's really what we're focused on at this point in time. And I'd be happy to take any questions that anybody might have about the Sustainable Rivers program and the tremendous expansion we're going through right now.
Thank you very much, Gretchen. I think we all enjoyed hearing what you had to say there. Doug will be dealing with the questions. I think we're starting to get some of those coming. So Doug.
Thank you, Gretchen. We had a couple of questions about the potential for the program to do other work on the Illinois River. And so here's the first one. With the reemergence of the Navigation and Ecosystem Sustainability Program, or NESP, is TNC re-engaging the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers about dam maintenance on the Illinois River and managing for a more natural flow regime on the Illinois River?
Yeah, that's a little mix of both SRP and NESP, but we've sort of stayed plugged in to water level management on the whole upper Mississippi River system, and trying to take advantage of the different opportunities. The most recent one being there's going to be a navigation closure this year and again in 2023. And trying to find out if there are opportunities to manage those dams differently. But I think in terms of NESP, one of the things that I really hope comes out of that funding, should it move forward, and there is some funding this year, is we can maybe start looking at things like automation at these dams. And I think that's going to be one of the most important things in terms of having more opportunity to do water level management, whether it's at the Mississippi dams or the Illinois River dams. And I know the Illinois River dams are, they're more difficult to manage, but I think that there's some tremendous opportunities on the Illinois River for us to look at improved conditions, especially from an aquatic plant standpoint.
In the participants list, I'm seeing a raised hand, username George. If you just go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button and can type in your question there.
Another question, do the interests of private water companies affect your management planning efforts?
Yeah, whenever we're doing sustainable rivers work, we try and make sure those folks are there from the very beginning of the discussions, and make sure that their concerns and anything that they want to make sure we know about prior to consideration of the environmental flow prescriptions is incorporated into our thoughts. So it can be a limiting factor, but it also, if we bring them in early, we often have found that there's more flexibility there than everybody understands. So when we come up with an environmental flow prescription, we aren't going to be able to apply it exactly like we would ultimately want to, but we figure out a way to get the most out of that and still consider the other dam operations.
Another question, I see the nation's longest river, the Missouri, has been left off of that working list. With huge flooding issues, as well as endangered species issues, would not the SRP be able to help with these issues?
Yeah, the Missouri has come up as we started talking about SRP. We're going to dive into working on the Atchafalaya, which is considered a big dam. And the other big dams in the country, there's only 9 of them. 6 of them are on the Missouri River. And so I think we're going to stick our toe in the water with the Atchafalaya, and that's going to be a huge project for us, working with Old River Structure as it manages the water that moves from the Mississippi into the Atchafalaya. I think as we get more experience working on those big dams, we might be more apt to maybe think about the Missouri. The Missouri is, as I'm sure whoever asked that question knows, is technically very challenging for us to work on. But certainly if the program continues at a $5 million level, I think we can start to look at these larger systems and how we can affect them in a positive way more than we have in the past.
Good. Time for one more, Tom?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. Let me summarize this. Have you seen any changes in the natural habitat after the installation of prescription at a dam?
Yeah, well, I think some of the Willamette and the Roanoke are probably, well, the Green River too. The Green River is an amazing story in and of itself that I could talk for 20 minutes on. But in terms of the Roanoke, they were really trying to create better conditions for a huge cypress forest downstream of the dams. And they've been able to put in place something called quasi run of the river, and they're able to wet the floodplain forest closer to when it should be getting wetted in the spring and dry it out during the summer. And they believe that the floodplain forest, obviously this is a long-lived floodplain forest, but is in a healthier condition than it was prior to them implementing that quasi run of the river. And they've probably been implementing it about 5 or 6 years now. And similarly on the Willamette, they have seen increased health in terms of, they were primarily working on endangered fish there, and increased health in terms of those fish species. So with this program having more money now, we really hope that we can get more data, because with such a tiny program in the past, we haven't gotten as much data as we should to really verify everything we believe is happening is in fact happening. And so I think we'll have even better answers for that in the future, especially if the program continues at that $5 million level.
Great, thanks, Gretchen. We'll look for more good things